You an interesting story of Bardon, which I call Bardon and the Professor. This story is the appropriate one to start the Bardon lessons with, because it illustrates the practical value of mastering the Hermetic truths. With the knowledge of these truths, you can take the reins of destiny into your own hands. The story takes us to a restaurant in Dresden, where Bardon and three men were discussing the problem of fate. One of the men, a professor, was very strongly of the opinion that there was no such thing as predetermined fate, and that each man was the author of his own destiny. Although the professor gave good reasons for his views, Bardon responded with amused laughter. "Professor," he said, "a person must travel quite a ways along the spiritual path and attain a certain maturity in his spiritual development before he can become the master of his own fate. In addition, he must be able to maintain his mastery under all possible circumstances. To say it in a few words, one must attain spiritual, astral and physical equilibrium if one wishes to take the reins of his destiny into his own hands. If you think you have reached such a level of maturity and can determine your fate yourself, I shall give you a small demonstration of the influence of destiny upon man." The professor was quite surprised, and he replied, "Mr. Bardon, if what you say is true, I would be very pleased if you can prove this to me." Lost in thought, Bardon gazed ahead. His faraway eyes had assumed a peculiar stare for a few moments. Then he blinked, as if awakening from a deep sleep, smiled at the professor and said, "I have just been looking into your future, and I shall prove the influence on fate in your life. If you are not anywhere near the Pulver Tower at midnight tonight, you will have proven that you are the author of your own fate. Let us wait and see if it is within your power to determine your destiny." The professor's face reflected some measure of arrogance as he responded, "I will wager anything that I will not be at the Pulver Tower at midnight tonight." Bardon then changed the subject, and everyone had another glass of wine. Later, when he left the restaurant and climbed into a taxi, the professor felt rather confident. For a bachelor, he lived in high style, for he owned a big villa and had a number of servants. Arriving home, he was not able to free himself from the memories of the afternoon's conversation with Bardon. What sort of man was this Bardon, he wondered. "Bardon will be proven to be incorrect tonight," he said to himself. "I will show him that I am the master of my destiny. I shall make a great effort not to leave my home again this evening." He decided to stay in bed the whole time, no matter what happened. What a satisfaction it would be to prove that Bardon was wrong. A glance at his watch made him realize that it was nearly 3 p.m. and that he had not yet had lunch. After he had eaten something, he tried to work on a report he was sending to a foreign magazine, but had quite a difficult time concentrating because Bardon's words kept nagging at him. At 5 in the afternoon, the professor's thoughts were still occupied with Bardon. To rid himself of these thoughts, he went to bed and decided not to get up before the next morning. but he tossed and turned. Not much later, a servant knocked at his door to inform him that a group of well-known artists had come to visit him and that they were downstairs. The professor was well connected with the people in the art world, and apart from his academic activities, he was also a theatre critic. His visitors seemed to have had a few glasses of wine and was in the mood for a party. When the servant returned to inform them that the professor had gone to bed early, they could not be kept back, but literally stormed his room. "What is the matter with you, old boy, creeping into bed at this time of day? You need some excitement in your life," one of the visitors exclaimed. The artists badgered the professor in an attempt to persuade him to get out of bed. The professor was in a weak position and eventually had to get dressed and had no choice but to offer his friends some wine. The comedian in the group, who was also a leading actor in some major productions, gave a most vivid account of the latest news, and soon the professor forgot all about Bardon's prophecy. The actor finished his stories by leaning towards the professor and saying, "My dear friend, you absolutely must come to the theatre with us this evening. Tonight is the premiere of a play in which I happen to be the main role. As a critic, you cannot miss it." After 2 glasses of wine, the professor accepted the invitation, and not much later, they were off to the theatre. The opening night turned out to be a great success, and the professor waited with his friends in the foyer for the leading actor to reappear. When the star finally arrived, everyone gave him their hearty congratulations, and the professor promised to write a very favorable critique. As the actors had another performance the next day, they gradually dissolved around 11:30. The leading actor said goodbye to the professor at the door. It was a Saturday night and the clubs were rather busy, and so the professor found that there was not a taxi in sight. He therefore decided to enjoy the benefit of some fresh air by walking part of the way home. The traffic in the main street was still heavy, so he turned down a side street which seemed less frequented and had enough excitement for the day. Music filled his ears from the half-open windows of the pubs and nightclubs as he strolled along, completely absorbed in thought. Suddenly there was a commotion near one of the taverns. A number of men and women were standing together in a group. Curious, the professor approached them and realized that 2 young men, obviously drunk, had insulted each other and were fighting. Unfortunately, the professor felt compelled to call out to the 2 men, telling them to go home and not fight in the street. Everything then changed at once. The 2 drunks stopped fighting. One of them began to insult the professor, who in turn reacted with harsh words. One of the ruffians then moved in on him, threatening. The professor gave the other a slap just as his attacker grabbed him. With that, a commotion ensued, and everyone shouted, and then the second ruffian turned towards him. The professor could see that he did not have a chance, and he hastily pushed himself through the crowd and ran away. But the man had hid his ego for revenge. Taking a knife out of his pocket, he ran after the professor, cursing at the top of his voice. Grasping for air, the professor turned into the busiest street, hoping to find a policeman there. My God, where are they when you need them? He was running for his life, but his assailant was gradually gaining on him. By now, he had almost exhausted himself. As he turned the corner at the Pulver Tower, Bardon suddenly stood right in front of him. "Help me," the professor cried out, panting heavily, his eyes filled with tears. "They want to kill me." Bardon gently pushed the professor aside. "Stop running and do not be afraid," he said kindly. Then he calmly stepped in front of the approaching ruffian, who suddenly seemed paralyzed, the knife still in his hand. Then he turned, cursing, and disappeared around the next corner. Bardon had changed the situation to the professor's advantage with the use of a Kabbalistic word. Bardon then turned to the professor, whose head by now had cleared, but his limbs were still filled with fear. He was stuttering slightly as he said to Bardon, "If you had not turned up, I would have been dead by now." Bardon patted his shoulder, pointed to his watch and said, "My dear professor, you still do not seem to be quite the master of your fate, for otherwise you would not be here at this hour. Things have turned out as I predicted. I hope you are now convinced that one cannot be the master of your fate while unable to control all your circumstances and lead them in the direction you choose."